Welcome back to Power of the Mind, the podcast where we give you simple tools to help you learn more about yourself and others. Today's episode, we're going to talk about what to do if you hate your mother-in-law or father-in-law or sister-in-law or really any of your in-laws. As the holidays approach, there are lots of opportunities for interacting with family, which for some of us is great. For some of us, maybe a little bit less great. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Power of the Mind, presented by Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare. It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
How's
There's a lot in there.
A whole lot.
Yeah.
Well, how's it going?
Going good.
What do you want to talk about today?
I don't know. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, it's the holidays.
It is.
It's we're right around the corner into Thanksgiving. Christmas is coming up.
Yeah.
Joyful time.
For some.
It's a time to be with family. It's going to be awesome. But there's a problem.
Yes.
I hate my mother-in-law.
You do?
Not me.
Oh, okay.
Yes. But there are some who do. And
Sure.
now they've got to spend the holidays with them. So how do we mentally prepare for that? What do we do to save the relationship?
Sure. Well, it depends on which relationship needs saving, right? I mean, the ideal situation, if I have a relative I don't like, is I say to myself, is it worth the personal sacrifice to spend the time with them or not? Would my Christmas be better not doing that? One of the challenges that we have in mental health is that sometimes we make choices that we don't necessarily have to and don't really calculate the cost. See, the thing is, if I choose to be around somebody who I find to be toxic or difficult, I pay the price. Now, if I choose not to be around them, I pay the price also. But for whatever reason, a lot of times we'll just not calculate the fact that we have to pay the price if we do show up. I think, oh man, I'll look bad or hurt somebody's feelings if I choose to be a part of this process again. And that is true. That's the challenge with this. It's a triage situation. So triage is when you have a series of bad decisions that have bad outcomes, and you have to pick the one that is the least bad. So one thing that can be really interesting is to really sit down and run the proverbial numbers again, so to speak, on the situation you're walking into. Like, how bad would it be if I set a limit and said this behavior or this individual, or both, are not congruent with who and how I want to be and who and how I want to live my life, and I'm going to choose not to be a part of that process.
Interesting, because it's, for me thinking about it, it's one, I got to save, it's my husband's mom, or maybe it's, my mom, who knows, but the expectation is that you show up, right? You go to family dinner, it's Thanksgiving, you're going to fight over the drumstick, but what's going to, so you don't hit anybody with it.
For a lot of people, the answer is I'm going to keep showing up because the challenges associated with setting that limit eclipse the price that I pay for walking through it. And sometimes that's appropriate because the other challenge I have is that sometimes my expectations aren't realistic. I find this a lot with folks who are wanting to argue with family around political issues or issues that are system-wide or large-scale, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter unless you're one of 9 people in the country. Your opinion on what the Supreme Court is doing isn't super relevant around the Thanksgiving table. You can choose to set that aside. You might decide, I find this person's preference to be, irritating. But there's a difference between being irritating and being unworthy of my ongoing communication. I can be around somebody who has views that I don't like or habits or patterns that I don't like, and I don't have to suffer if I choose to allow them to just be who they are, particularly if I'm able to do that for a short period of time.
And I was thinking too, like the worst thing, like in my case, would be just got to be nice, be polite, and we'll get out of this and we'll go home and we're done. For some people, though, it could trigger falling back into bad habits or possibly taking that glass of wine when I know I shouldn't be drinking, or medicating myself to make sure I'm able to put up with this person because maybe they're the reason for past addictions or something. So, I mean, I wasn't thinking about it at first, but these could be those triggers for some people that maybe they have to draw that line and say, yes, it's family dinner, but if I go, I'm putting myself right back in the place that I've tried so hard to stay away from, or may compromise sobriety. Or
I can think of a lot of different clients over the years who've been early in their process and have had to make some difficult decisions about this sort of thing. One in particular comes to mind. Her family system was pretty crazy. She was raised in almost a cult. People use the word cult too frequently, but it was definitely a brand of religion that was not particularly pleasant. I'll say that. And as she was continuing to grow and kind of figure out who she was, she had to really contend with, do I go back for the holidays? How do I survive around my family? And then at one point later in her life, she made some choices around work to leave a situation that probably wasn't very good for her. But then she didn't have a place to live, which is pretty uncomfortable. And she had a couple of kids, so she ended up having to decide if she could move back in with those folks. And we talked a lot about the idea of returning to the scene of the crime. And that's really what we're doing when we go back, if we're early in our process and starting to uncover some of the challenges, the emotional, physical, sexual abuse type stuff, and we head back in that direction. It can be a challenge. And sometimes, often even, it can be a challenge that's wise to avoid. And it's also very difficult to put my own well-being ahead of the societal norms and expectations, and really the family norms and expectations around the holidays. And it's not always an easy decision either, because there is some pain and challenge that can be caused, especially if there are other people in the family, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, in-laws, uncles, aunts, etc. And you can do some damage that cannot always easily be undone. So it's not a small decision to make, and it doesn't have to be a slam dunk or a guarantee every time. Sometimes a hard decision is a better choice. And other times I just need to change my perspective and see what happens if I let people be themselves, because they're really just going to be themselves anyway, whether I choose to be bothered by it or not.
Right.
It's been my observation most of the time.
Most people don't change unless they want to change. So,
and a lot of people don't even change then.
That is true.
That
is true.
Change is tough.
Yeah. So my thing is, we've got, I think about a husband and a wife, and then you go to your mother-in-law's house and you're used to being, the one in charge. I'm the wife, I cook this way, I do it this way.
Sure.
Or maybe mother-in-law is coming to your house for dinner, and you see your husband, who's this big strong guy, and he's running the house, but when mom comes around, sometimes he tends to revert back to that mama's boy, or you kind of see that dynamic switch.
Sure.
So that, thinking about just certain situations to put out there, dealing with that personality, or how do you just let that happen? Do you, what's the...
Well, it's really interesting to look at the why underneath that sort of thing, right? So you're talking about a situation where my spouse gets around their family members and changes in their personality. And that's pretty common, actually. We tend to fill our slot and jump into the slot we grew up in when we get around our family, and sort of change roles and almost change personas. And so then, in that situation, I would probably look at, how does that impact you as the observer? Like, does it bring up insecurity or fear? Does he like mom better than me, for example? Am I really, in every situation where there's a long-term partnership, what we're really looking for is a secure, functioning relationship. And what that means is it's you and me against the world. You're on my team, you're my person. When crap comes down, I know I can depend on you to take care of me, and vice versa. And if I get into a situation where, my spouse's role changes around his or her parents, then I can come into question, am I valuable? Am I important? And how do I rank? And that's an interesting question, but ultimately, it's a question for me to ask, right? And also, in the event that my partner does have this particular, what I might view as a flaw of, coming into orbit around mom or sister or brother, and that does impact me, is it permanent? And how big a deal is it really?
Right, because I think back in early in my marriage, that was
Sure.
very, this is my person, and if I get into an argument or something with his mother, he needs to be defending, me. I'm his wife. But now that I'm older, and probably because I have older children,
Sure.
You start seeing, and probably, now that I'm almost a certified therapist, going on our
basically,
30th episode,
yeah,
so I see it differently with the fact that that's his mom.
Sure.
He's got to, he's got to be there for his mom too. So it's probably because I have a 23-year-old son now. That I'm like, hey,
so you can
he's
relate.
Gotta look out for his
You can
mama
relate,
too.
yeah. And also, after a person has been in a relationship for a long, long time, the insecurities and fears tend to atrophy because it's been a long, long time. You get to a certain point, and this is one of the things I think we talked earlier in the series about polyamority and the idea of having multiple partners. One of the things that you generally miss out on in that situation is the secure, functioning side of the relationship. I always say to folks who are in that spot, well, who's going to take care of you when you're old and ugly? Because sooner or later, we're all getting old and ugly. Not much you guys, nothing you can do.
Man.
Yeah, we all lose our charms in the end, is the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend song. I was listening to that the other day from, what was that Nicole Kidman movie that came out forever ago? It was a musical, Moulin Rouge. I was listening to the Moulin Rouge soundtrack, and I thought, that song has stood the test of time in part because there's a lot of truth to the idea that, we all lose our charms in the end. So when that happens, it's kind of nice to be next to somebody who is also losing their charms and to have 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years of shared experience under your belt, and to be able to think, well, it'd be a real pain in the butt for them to take off at this point.
Yeah. I mean, so much work.
So much paperwork and new person and all that stuff. We might as well just stick around for each other.
Well, and I think, for me, my eyes are getting worse. So I think that's somebody's way of saying,
there you go.
what?
I'll help you out.
My husband's supposed to get his eyes fixed. I'm like, please don't. Don't do that. You don't need glasses. You're fine. But,
so as we're in a relationship, I think I've mentioned this stat before, but the Gottman folks, they did the study of people in their first year of marriage and in their 10th year of marriage, and 70% of the problems were the same. People actually don't change. What changes is our posture toward it. And that's probably a pretty worthwhile answer to this particular question. How do I survive my in-laws who I hate? Say, well, I look at how they're impacting me in a way that leads me to have that response. And I ask myself, how much of that is about me and how much of that is about them. And it's often quite a bit about me. Most resentment, if you really boil it down, when I have anger at a situation or a person, either I have unrealistic expectations, aka childish expectations, or I'm being mistreated. And if I'm being mistreated, I'm obligated to stand up and say, hey, I'm being mistreated. This needs to stop. And if I am having unrealistic expectations, I need to sit down, not stand up, and to say, okay, Greg, time for you to grow up. The world isn't going to be the way you want it to be. People aren't going to treat you the way you want them to treat you all the time. They get to be who they are and act how they act. And it doesn't need to be cause for a bunch of discomfort.
So if your mother-in-law comes in and wants to add a little extra salt to the gravy because that's the way she does it,
you just throw that shit on the floor.
You were done.
I'm done.
Flip the table.
I'm done. Yeah, flip the table. Ever see the Chris Farley cartoon?
Yes.
No, not cartoon.
Oh,
where they feed him the dry crystal coffee. Actually, sir, we substituted your coffee for these dry, Folgers crystals. Folgers. And he goes crazy and just tears the restaurant apart. It's hysterically funny.
So that's where you draw the line.
Chris Farley coffee. Yeah, the salted gravy.
We're done.
It's over.
Because everybody knows it's like chicken broth that we use in there.
That's right.
Better than bouillon is actually the best. But so those little things.
Just kidding. For the record, just so we're clear.
So those little things, it's once or twice a year. You got to put up with it. Just deal with it.
Right.
But if, mother-in-law comes in and it's constant critiques and constant, bullying almost. That's where you...
And
don't look at your husband to make the stand. You have to do that.
Well, again, we would like, if we're talking about secure functioning relationships, in a secure functioning relationship, I will go and advocate for my partner even in the face of other members of the family. So there's some merit to the belief that is how it, quote unquote, should go. Mm-hmm. That said, that might not be realistic for whatever reason for my partner, and I can voice that request and expectation and need and demand to my partner, and that may work or it may not. It depends on my relationship and my partner's relationship with a family member. I really don't have much control over that, but I do have control over saying, hey, this isn't going to work for me. You have to stop doing this now. And the only other thing I have control over is my geographic location most of the time. And so I can say,
do you like me living here?
Well, that's one option, yes.
Yeah.
And also, if you continue to talk to me this way, I'm going to find someplace else to be. So you make your choice, and
your son's
I'll make
coming
mine.
with me.
Yeah, and your son or your grandson or whoever it is coming with me. And so
had to bring in the grandbabies.
Hey, listen, when we got some leverage, we got leverage. So that's the other thing I do when I'm involved in a negotiation. I recognize my position and I apply leverage if and when I can. But that's at the end of the day, and that's the case too in some of the more severe situations. So I work in treatment, and a lot of people in treatment are very disappointed to be in treatment during the holidays. Well, the reality is, for most folks, treatment's a much better spot to be in the holidays than at home. The dynamics that have led to the challenges that underlie the addiction are happening at home. And actually, you also traditionally would get a big glut of people going to treatment right after the holidays. January and February, everything would fill up.
I have that on the calendar that I want to discuss as we're going into the holidays, like why that happens and does it happen? Do you see that? So it is. I'm on the right track.
There's a lot of good reasons for it happening. If you think about it, let's say I have a son or a daughter at college and they come home for the holidays and they're home on Christmas for 2 or 3 weeks. I become very acquainted with habits that they have not necessarily shared with me in the past. Or let's say I'm kind of on the edge addiction-wise, and my family is pretty challenging for me. I have one family member who's an addict or another family member who's abusive or been abusive in the past. I go home, I'm exposed to the behavior, and my addiction takes a turn for the worse. So there's just a lot of reasons why the holidays become sort of an epicenter for addiction and its movement and direction.
So without even realizing it, you gave a teaser for the next couple episodes coming up.
Yes.
I would assume, I was thinking.
Yeah.
Because being somebody who, I've never luckily had the battle with addiction, but holidays are stressful.
Sure.
The expectations, the hope that this is going to be perfect, the perfect day. And, that's kind of where I'd like to go over the next couple episodes, is just talk about expectations and why people fall into suicide. I mean, I would have to think that's
that way.
Pretty high.
Around the holidays, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, teasers.
Teasers.
Love it.
There we go.
So, too much salt in the gravy. We're going to let that go or flip the table.
Probably better to let it go versus
Okay,
flip
perfect.
the table, yeah.
Bullying, you got to stand up for that.
Yeah, not so much.
Use the grandbabies because that would work on me. Definitely would work on me. So
the ultimate leverage that I have most of the time is my geographic location. And now with Uber and Lyft, even when I don't have leverage, a lot of the times I do. And I just have to remember, I have to just kind of do the math. Is what's happening now and the pain I'm enduring now worth what I'm going to have to go through with myself later? Or do I need to take a stand? Do I need to say, no more? I won't be a part of this process any longer. At least not for today.
And what do you always say? You always say that people will not change unless what they are doing now is too difficult and you need to change, right?
People resist change, and the pain is staying the same.
There it is.
When that gets worse than the fear of change, then change happens.
So
another way of putting it is when it gets worse than the pain of change, because change hurts every time. If you engage in a new behavior, particularly in your family system, generally new boundaries are met with rage. That's a pretty safe bet. So if I say no for the first time, and I've been saying yes for a long time, the people in my presence will poke and prod and then eventually blow up in whatever way they blow up. So there's good reason to fear change. It makes sense to fear change. But most of the time, there's really good reason to fear continuing to stay the same too. And we tend to discount that.
Right.
We tend to take the long-term pain over short-term pain and its accompanying gain.
Yeah.
Often to our detriment.
Well, I expected this. I don't know what I expected, because usually with you, we go down like a more dark path, because I'm thinking, I hate my mother-in-law. This is going to be funny, but it can actually be pretty serious. So
well, it can, yeah. It depends on the circumstances, except for you.
Perfect mother-in-law.
You have a perfect mother-in-law?
I know.
That's pretty neat. Congratulations on that.
I will be.
You will. You are. I
am.
I didn't understand.
I don't know. I might be difficult sometimes.
I doubt it.
Too much salt in the gravy.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second.
I don't think so. I think I want to be a good mother-in-law. It's with the girls. It's been they throw some crazies at me once in a while, but my son has yet to really bring somebody home, which is probably smart with 4 sisters and me as his mom. So I'll keep you informed on that one, because I already don't like her, and he doesn't even have a girlfriend yet. And I'm already
all right.
That's my Joshy. That's my baby. So, well, thank you.
Sure.
You've saved me from eating salty gravy or putting up with the salty gravy. So
that's right. You tell him. You say, absolutely not.
No salt. Flipping the table. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to my favorite part of the week, Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare, Power of the Mind, the awesome Greg Struve. Happy holidays.
Yes, indeed. For information about mental health and addiction treatment, you can reach out to Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare online at granitemountainbhc.com. That's Granite Mountain BHC.com. Or give us a call at 877-338-6287. That's 877-338-6287. If you have a comment about this podcast or a question you'd like us to address in the podcast, you can check out the Contact Us page at my website, gregstruve.com. That's GREGSTRUV as in Victor, E as in Edward.com. This has been a Cast 11 production brought to you by Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare. This episode was produced by Austin Morrison. Follow Cast 11 on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Talking Glass Media.